Okay. Peter, alcoholic. And I just, before I get into step four, and I have no idea where I'm going yet with step four, there was some things we talk about in our third step, which I always found important. I knew nothing about this stuff when I got here. I want to be real clear about that. When I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't even know who Bill and Bob was. Steps and traditions, I don't know what I can't even understand the traditions. I remember going to an AA clubhouse, and there were those pictures of Bill and Bob we see on a lot of our clubhouses, and I thought they were two union guys representing. They look like feds to me, And I don't know who they were, and some old timers said that's Bill and that's Bob, and he explained who they were, and I said okay. And a week later, I went back to that clubhouse, and I'm explaining to this new guy who's got 6 days less than me who these two prominent figures are. And that old timing, because no, you got it backwards. That's Bill and that's Bob. So that's where I was at. So anything I talk about has been given to me. Most things I talk about has been given to me. It says. He's the principal, we're his agents, and the way I was able to look at that is an agent represents the principal. We have celebrities and athletes who hire agents to go out and represent them. So my book is telling me I'm supposed to be representing God, push it further, to be a walking prayer. Does that look that way in my life? That he's the father and I'm his child. Most parents are going to give their kids all they need, not necessarily what they want. And so this God is going to provide me with what I need, not always what I want, nor is it going to be on my terms. It goes on to say, when I took this position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. I had a new boss. And he's all powerful and going to provide me what I need if I keep close and perform his work well. That's a promise or a warning. And not that God's going to keep me away from him. I'm just not listening. But if I keep close to God, I will experience his taking care of me. I don't have to get close to be close. There's no proximity I have found in hearing so many stories between me and this God. The delusional thoughts, I have to get close. Like if I work hard enough, if I run around the block enough, if I work out, I will suddenly stumble into God. And the aha moment is he was always closer to me than my own breath. That is the great reality I found deep down within, that in order for me to get close, to experience the closeness of God, I don't have to move. I just have to remove stuff that's blocking me. Over and over and over again, continually blocking stuff, removing stuff that's blocking me from God. It says this, and as far as performing his work well, I don't have to discover the cure for some fatal illness. I don't have to become a monk. I don't have to levitate or walk on water. Perform his work well. How about I go out with a servant's heart and stop being a servant? Some of our greatest leaders in AA are all servants. Who's ever last shall be first. So I get to a meeting early. It's not my home group, but Bill's over there setting up chairs all alone. You know what? I can help to take my jacket off and go help. I get to a meeting early and I see some guy vibrating in the back. It's not my home group, but he looks new. I'll go over and help him. And the meeting breaks down. Before I go to the diner, get on my cell phone and start vaping, I see Bill breaking down the room all alone again. I go help him out again. It starts with simple things like that, to be of service to others. It says we found new power flowing. Steve talked a whole bunch about this. Well, thank God there's power flowing in, because I'm out. When it says peace of mind, I've talked a lot about the mind so far. It's not that I have peace of mind, like suddenly my mind is not troubling anymore. This thing is always going to cause a problem, but I'm not operating out of that. I'm not operating out of woundedness. I'm beginning to operate little by slowly, starting to operate out of this soul. It's that little quiet voice that suddenly we touch. And that kind of makes its way up, and I go, great idea. I'm inspired because I'm living in spirit, and I'm being with inspiration. You know, if we think about it, we go through the day and you start to listen to those voices. I want that piece of cake, or she or he looks cute, or I need to go do this, and I need to do, and I'm listening to it. Going down a supermarket aisle, the ice cream looks good, and sometimes you really shouldn't. I'm standing on a corner, it's a cold, rainy night in my car, and I live right down the block, and this is a really long red light. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, I just want to get home. If I take this light, no one's around, there's no police around, and go ahead, take the light, no one's around. You know the negotiation we do. And you ever notice it's that other voice, it's against the law. Here's where I'm going with this. Who's talking to me? We got a whole bunch of voices that are talking all day. We have conversations with them. I'm sure if I was a betting man, half this room is listening to Steve and I while we're listening to a whole lot of stuff. When is lunch? I'm hungry. Maybe I'll go into town. I don't want to go into town. I should go into town. Why are we going into town for? To serve free lunch. Then that means I got to bring people. I don't want anybody in my car. You should have people. You're not really a fellowship guy. And I'm pissed off by lunchtime. I'm not even hungry anymore. I hate this place. I'm going home. And then there's this other voice that cuts through, but how often do I listen to it? And when I begin to operate little by slowly out of this place called the soul, which is always right, I suddenly find myself traveling light. Sometimes it's an aha moment, the revelation, like it was, yes, I got it. I used to do a lot of writing. I wrote screenplays and plays and things like that. And I was a musician for longest time. And both of those things, when I would get in there, I was part of whatever I was doing, part of the music. Or when I was writing a screenplay, I got into the play. I was like those, I can hear those characters. I was living with those characters that I'm writing about. In those moments, if I look back on it, I wasn't worried about the mortgage. I wasn't worried about the electric bill. Fill my car up? I should take my car to the car wash. I got to get to the gym. I should do this. I got to get to a meeting. It was all removed. I was present to the moment. It was peace of mind. I don't need to be a musician or a writer or an athlete to experience that because God is always there. I just get to touch that. And when I'm in that place and I'm starting to live out of spirit, I'm not living in the illness. Once I lock into this God and enhance this whole experience, that drink problem, as Step 10 says, has been removed. Doesn't mean I'm non-alcoholic and I can drink safely. It's just not driving at me. If I'm not thinking about, if I'm not listening to the mind that tells me to go drink, then I'm not drinking, which means I have no compulsion going on. And there's a reason for that. I've been awakened spiritually. And so I do this third step prayer, and which, by the way, can be great promise if I follow through with the third step prayer, and can be the greatest horror show if I don't. Because if I don't do a third step prayer, I'm always going to go back to doing what I always did, which means I'm always going to get what I always got. So I'm back to step one now. It's going to say, I'm in so much pain, the fire's on me so bad, I need to do whatever it takes. And it's really the willingness to turn it over. Whether we have a life-changing moment in step 3 or not, it's the willingness to do this work. And it says next we launch on the course of vigorous action. So just some mechanics. I was always instructed to pray before I write, because I tried doing a fourth step without writing, and very little or nothing was getting done, and I was editing what I was writing because I knew it was coming next, 5. And so I shared this with my sponsor one day, and I'll clean up the language, but he went up one side, down the other on me about whose life is it, and you can't write a fourth step, he said. So why are you trying? I said, what? He says, God's going to write your fourth step. You just need to go to him, where the pen becomes a spiritual translator. And if we ever write an inventory, you'll see stuff coming off the pen. So where's this coming from? It's that other voice. It's that other power who's trying to draw us near to him, if you will. Like God doesn't understand I'm in trouble. And I'm thinking, if I write this fourth step, I will experience finally God, failing to realize that God's doing the fourth step with me. He's keeping me sober while I'm doing the fourth step. I already got God. I just need to awaken to it, yeah? So my sponsor gave me a prayer. I still use it today when I write inventory. And I wrote across the top of the page just a little prayer, not in the book. Thank you, God, for allowing me to be searching fearless and moral. Be really clear on who's going to allow it. I'm not searching fearless and moral. I'll embellish, I'll cut corners, I might even lie. I don't know, anything's possible. Left untreated. So I wrote that, and I would take a couple of beats, get still. Just get centered, like Bill does every time we start a session, a moment of silence. Brings us home. It's not like my prayers are going to command the Spirit to do anything, because they can't. Then I'm a God bigger than God. But it gets me centered as to what I'm about to do, who I'm talking to right now. And that's what I would do, and I picked up the pen. And I started with a master list. I went back to our lives. It says nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. They didn't say you need good penmanship and the best spiral notebook and highlighters and incense and candles and all, and chimes and burning sage. It just said, just give your best effort here, because it's coming from God anyway. So I wrote a master list. I went back to my life. Mom, dad, brothers, grandparents, schoolmates. It just went like that, kept going. Who was I resentful with? Yep, got it. My sponsors say, are you agitated when you see them? Yeah, okay. You know, when Joe walks in your room, go, oh no, this guy again with his big book. I got a resentment going on. No resentment's acceptable. All are unacceptable. And I was always instructed, when I was done with this list of names, whether it's 10 names, 20 names, whatever it is, my sponsor said, if you get to 50, stop. It's all redundant. I remember I was in Maine for a conference many years ago, and this guy came up to me. And he said, you're Peter M. I said, can I talk to you? He said, yeah, sure. And he just looked so much pain. And he said, I've been writing my fourth step, and it's killing me. I said, why? What's going on? Well, this was maybe the month of June, and he had been writing since last September. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I got 2,000 names on there. My sponsor told me keep writing. I said, what? He was part of, you talked about this, you know, these groups, part of this group. I says, 2,000 names. You're not that important. Neither are they, you know. And anyway, they gave me kind of a cutoff point. And once I got the names down, that's the resentment column, I had to take a look at this. And I realized this when I was writing my first inventory, on how often I could be living in the second column in my sharing. You know, I had a tough time at work. My boss is really an SOB, or my wife, or my kids, and, you know, the traffic out there. And I'm talking about what's in the second column, but I'm never going past that. I'm also a Catholic, and I go to a confession, which is a beautiful thing. And I sit in the booth with the priest. I've done a few face-to-faces, not my call, their call, but usually go into this booth. And there's this prayers you say, and you confess. It's wonderful. And the priest asks you, are you sorry for your sins? And they give you absolution. They give you a little penance and pat you on the hiney, and off the door you go. You make your penance, and I'm deemed clean again, if you will. And I'm just dumbing that down for me. It's a beautiful thing. What AA does is push it. Because I'm clear on where I fell short, sin, missing the mark, falling short. And I put it on paper, and I go share it with the sponsor. It's a confession. Hey, sponsor, this is where I'm really resentful. This is my sex conduct, and I've been afraid of all these things, and institutions and print, and this is the icky part of me that's killing me. And he doesn't say, here's penance, go out the door. He gives me instructions. He gives me feedback. He tweaks it a little bit. And then he points me to, when I'm all said and done, to go get quiet for an hour, and then they push it even further, 6 and 7. They push it even further to go now back to those people I've harmed and make it right. They push it as far as it can get stretched to flush out all the poison. So I get to travel light. Because knowledge and information won't walk me through the world of the spirit, the same way money won't get me to the gates of heaven. The soul will. And it's covered in plaque. So I wrote, you know, it went something like this. Resentment, mom. Second column, cause. That's the reason why I'm angry with this person. Mom was alcoholic. Mom committed suicide. Mom wasn't strong. She should have been stronger. And I wrote, Dad, he never played sports. He wasn't home all the time. He was a tough guy. I had a family who lived 2 doors away from me, my best friends growing up. And the father was more of a business type guy, traditional guy, a family man. And they always had their door open. You walk by, it was like everyone wants to hang out at my friend's house. I'll call him Joe. And the mom would always invite us in. The front door was always open. And sometimes I'd walk by, and the big German Shepherd was sitting on the front porch. And I walked by, and this dad had this recliner. And more often than not, or at least that's what my mind picked up, one of his sons was sitting next to him, and it looked like the Norman Rockwell painting, a Hallmark card, father and son having this fireside chat. My dad was cut from a completely different cloth. He didn't do that. So I wrote about this stuff. And I would write the third column on the 7 areas of self, how this person angered me, and it has a direct impact on my pride, which means if I'm prideful, I'm God. No one should do this to me. No one should make me feel bad. No one should put me off. I'm God. It's the biggest of the 7 deadly sins. It is the mother of all sins. It gives birth to the rest of them. I see through that. And because I'm seeing through that, it means my behavior ain't so good. I'm operating out of this. My personal relationships, how this thing should look. We should, mom and dad, me and dad should look this way, and it's not working. It's not happening. That has an impact on me. I take that out there. And I take it into that relationship. And moreover, when I look in the mirror, I see a screw up instead of someone just trying to get by. My self-esteem, how I feel about myself. You ever been around people who you just give them all leverage? You lose you and them because they're alpha males maybe, or they have all the money, or they have the power right now, and you're like just going along. And you get out and say, I'm hungover from that. Or maybe family's embarrassing and it affects me when I walk into school. They all know about my family, and I just don't want to be seen. I want to be anonymous. Self-esteem. Because I'm getting it, this I learned the hard way, I'm getting my self-worth. Now, overflated self-worth we call ego now, but I'm getting my self-worth, a sense of who I am, like I'm not perfect, I'm not the worst, I'm okay, warts and all, it's okay. I get that from people. Very dangerous. Now, growing up, it's nice when mommy and daddy are saying you're a wonderful person, you're going to do great, and grandma and grandpa say, we're proud of you. That's nice to hear. It's nice when the sponsor gives you an attaboy. It's nice at the end of a meeting when people say, thank you for sharing, that was very helpful. That's great. But I cannot derive a sense of okayness within me from that, because I'm doing that, I got to listen to people say, you're an idiot. My security for me is the biggest trap of all of them. Next to pride, this is the next biggest trap for me. My security is what I need from you to be okay. I'm secretly demanding that you make me comfortable. It's completely unfair. I'm secretly demanding from you that you make me feel okay about me. Now, when a loved one, when the spouse says, honey, I love you more than anything wrong, of course that feels good. Especially when the feeling's mutual. When the boss calls you over and says, hey, Steve, I'm so glad you're part of this company. If I hear that, I go home and say, wow, that felt really good. But to get who I am out of that, where's God in the picture? I guess I don't need God. I just need people to constantly funnel me. And by the way, with that security, the emotional security attachment, there's never enough. There's just never enough. Case in point, I speak at something called Gopher State Roundup. Anyone's ever been there? Saturday night, 8,000 people, I would say. I get done with the Saturday night talk, and there's a line from here to Timbuktu. People, AAs, which you don't see anymore in AA, or a lot less of when we were told to go thank the speaker. But they waited in line, a whole bunch of people. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I get into the lobby, hey, thank you so much, gang. Right? Pretty good so far. I'm headed for the door. A bunch of us are going to a local diner to have a little something, we do after the meeting. And I hear, hey, Pete, And I turn around, some guy gives me, this should have been the first warning. He gave me one of these. In Brooklyn, we have a nice reply with a different finger. And I went over. He said, I want to talk to you. I said, yeah, what's up? And he said, and I quote, that was an interesting talk. That's AA code for it sucked. And he went on to say, I never heard New Age AA before. And all I did was tell my story. Now, I heard all those people saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. That felt good. And then he said that, and it didn't feel good. You know. I was planning my next trip to Gopher State to change the entire talk for that guy. He flew home with me. He came back to my room with me. He went to work with me on Monday morning. That's how dangerous emotional security dependent upon, and I'm guilty of, we're all guilty of. That's why I have it in the third column. And my ambition, what do I want here? My pocketbook, my money. I want a nice American Express car, but I don't want to pay the monthly fee. I want to buy a car and the bank will loan me money, but I really want to make the payments. The IRS should not take my money. Well, they really shouldn't, by the way, but anyway. And my sex life, conduct. Big Book doesn't say have sex this way and you can't have it that way. They're talking about who am I harming, my selfish and self-seeking motives. Big Book doesn't care what you do behind closed doors. But am I hurting me? Am I hurting other people? Is it become my new addiction? Because it will if I'm not careful. I do a lot of these workshops, and somewhere on Saturday afternoon, usually, I get the guy who kind of walks over to you, looking at this floor, and he says, you got a minute? I say, sure. He said, I need to talk to you about something. Now I know what's coming. I'm struggling with something. I know that it's coming. It's my sex stuff. It's become an addiction. And if their girlfriend or wife found out or anyone else found out, everyone would be crushed. And they're watching things on the internet all the time that they, shouldn't be doing, or visiting places for that lady who will understand for a fee. And they're doing this kind of stuff. And they're trying to be sober, spiritually fit men in AA, or be husbands or boyfriends, and it's killing them, and they can't get out, because that's what alcoholism does. It goes underground, resurface in other areas. And then I have the rubber hits the road column 4. And Steve talked about this. We disregard the other person involved entirely. I hope I'm not stepping on what Steve talked about. But no matter what that person did, even if they were dead wrong, I got to put them on the side. So, to illustrate, I'm writing my first inventory. And I came to a name that I put down, and I didn't want to write it. And I always get moved to share this because it seems to be a lot of us, men and women, will have one of these in there. And it's just my experience. It seems the women seem to be more liberal to talk to each other about it, where us guys, it's a threat to the maleness in us to talk about it. And what happened to me when I always say around ages 8 to 10, I always refer to this man as a distant relative. He would take me down in the basement and be really inappropriate with me. And he was, I'm this tall, and so he was a big guy. And he told me if I told anyone that bad things were going to happen to me. And he didn't use the word gay. He used a bad word, that people were going to think you're that. So as a 10-year-old, you're like, that's like a mortal sin. I can't, that's how I was brought up. That's not good. I see different things now. And I was petrified, and I remember vibrating on the inside, and I felt so dirty and disgusting, I can't tell anyone, and I would not go to my dad, because I didn't trust my dad back then. He might believe that man and not me. He might even kill me and that man. I didn't what does an 8-year-old know how to process this stuff, or a 10-year-old? Even nowadays, as mature they are. What did I do? So I'm writing this inventory, and it comes to the fourth column. Where am I at fault? Disregard the other person involved entirely. I can almost feel it right now because my chest is shaking. And I remember closing the book and saying, I didn't do anything wrong. And I wanted to just scream it. Why they asked? I didn't do anything wrong. I was afraid. I was so afraid. And my mom was drunk or in a mental institution all the time, and I had no relationship with my dad. I said, what do you do? And I remember closing the book, and I went to a payphone. And sponsorship, thank God for good sponsors. I called my sponsor. I walked outside. I had to get air. I couldn't breathe. You know, you get so angry, you feel like you're going to cry at the same time. You just want to. I was always notorious going off for punching things. That's what I punched my fist through walls, gashed my hand open a few times. I'd throw things. And I can feel that happening during this fourth step, during this inventory. I said, I need air. And I went outside, and I went to a phone right outside this drugstore in Bay Ridge. I'll never forget it. I called my sponsor. His girlfriend got on the phone, and she was a double winner, AA and Al-Anon. And she kind of calmed me down, and she said, here comes Tony now. And I told him, well, he said, what's going on? I told him. And I said, Tony, they're asking me where am I for? Was I self-seeking, fighting? I'm dropping F-bombs like crazy while I'm doing this. And he says, hold it. He said, let me ask you a question. How long have you hated this man? And I went on a rant. He says, just put that down. I hate him. Move on. And I'm so grateful that he wasn't that rigid. He was rigid, but not so rigid where he couldn't bend. Well, you got to come up with selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. I didn't have it. It wasn't there. And I just put down, I hate, we'll call him Joe. I hate Joe. Move on. And then you know what he did? He shared with me what happened to him around the same age, exactly what was going on with him from an older gentleman. The same thing, almost identical. And I remember my shoulders dropping, and I can breathe again, that I'm not a freak, I'm not a unicorn, I'm not a bad person. These things happen to children. And I finished the fourth step. I moved on. And I remember sharing that in step 5. And he was gentle. This tough guy from Brooklyn was really gentle in that department and didn't make me feel icky about sharing some sex conduct on my selfish and self-seeking ways. Because if there's a name for it, it's been done. And I wrote down principles and institutions. The biggest principles up until not too long ago were, insurance companies. I remember writing about my religious community. They didn't save my mom. The medical community didn't save my mom. They kept medicating her. I was angry with my dad for not saving my mom. I was angry with me for not saving my mom. But I wrote down a lot of institutions. Growing up during the Vietnam War, I remember that. On the news, used to watch it. They used to give body counts on the news. So many dead, MIAs. And then these men and women came home and were spit on. I was furious with the government. I wrote government. Treated these men and women wrong. Got involved in something we shouldn't have gone. And this whole thing, and I don't want to get into an outside issue, but that's where I was at the time. I remember asking my dad, what does that mean, MIA, Dad? And he tried to explain to me that I could understand it. I remember, you mean you can't find these? And I was petrified as a little kid. What was going on here? I'm writing an inventory, 28, 29 years old, and that was going down. And principles. I grew up with children should be seen and not heard. I was told that at a table with company. I would talk like little kids talk. Children should be seen and not heard. I'm mortified. I want to kill somebody. Real men don't cry. And my biggest one, I grew up, I don't know if you guys probably know, we're in New York. Do the right thing. Hey kid, do the right thing. Guy with a big cigar and a pinky ring. Do the right thing. What does that mean? I'm trying. It's not working. Can you elaborate on this point? My dad would look at me and said, you got to start doing the right thing. If anyone's seen Goodfellas, that Robert De Niro guy, that's my dad. That's how he would talk. That was his way. It didn't work in the father and son department. It worked for him out there. And he would talk to me like he spoke out there. He was just assumed that I would get it. I didn't get it. So I wrote that down. And I think about it, it's all the stuff that I've been walking, you know, that stuff, the plaque on the soul, we're walking around with. And what's really dangerous, when I get used to walking around with it, this is how I operate. And then the purging starts. Oh yeah, I'm really, and this, and then I start writing stuff. And the fear inventory is just false evidence appearing real. If I was an attorney and presented to the jury bogus evidence, they would throw it out. It wouldn't fly. This has nothing to do with the case. This has been manufactured. This is prejudiced information. Whatever it is, out. Yet in my jury, it's real. It's the kid who sees something in his room and cries for mama in the middle of the night, and she comes in, turns on the light, and it's just a chair. When you close that, it looks like an animal or something. The boogeyman. I'm operating where I believe everything out there is real, and it's just given to me by my mind. They're out to get me. The oh my gods, oh my God, all day long, because fear is always about looking into the future. I'm sitting here right now, and I'm thinking about Monday at work or Tuesday, oh my God. Just walking around with all this poison, wondering, I can't get traction with God. There's always that thing in the way. I'm looking at you and you and you. You seem to be connected. I'm just not. I pretend I am. And I get an opportunity to flush it out by writing fear inventory and sex inventory. The first time I wrote sex inventory was a lot of stuff. Not because I was some Don Juan, just a lot of selfish stuff. You're on the streets, you use people. It's just the way it goes. And there's times when I quietly see, this is really not good. And then I share that. And the longer I'm sober, it's the sex inventory, I mean, it's pretty boring. There's not much. God has allowed me to practice fidelity. There's no selfish and self-seeking motives in that. It's an act of love. Whether we're holding hands or just sitting by the beach or something further, it's that. But that's pretty cool. But if there's a name for it, it's been done. And I think I used up my half hour, so I'm going to turn it over to my buddy Steve.
Thank you, Peter. Peter left his book up here, so now I'm gonna scroll through it for the important parts that I have overlooked. So when I first got sober, I wandered into a little book study, and that's where my sponsor, I found the guy that would become my sponsor, and I've been there about 2 or 3 months, and I was just so excited about everything going on in AA. I really was, and so I'm sitting there in that book study with my 2 markers, and I'm just highlighting, because everything anybody said was like just, blowing my mind, and I'm highlighting and highlighting. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm highlighting, Frank." He went, "Like the important parts." And he said, "Just relax, man. Just relax and be here with us, and we'll be revisiting all of this again. But just let's just share some experience." I got to say, when Peter talked about that Gopher State Roundup, I spoke there about 17 years ago, and it's certainly the biggest thing that I'd ever spoken at, the biggest crowd, and I felt my head swelling a little bit as I'm going home, and I talked to my sponsor, and I said, "Joe, I said, that really, I'm trying to be careful." I said, I said, "There were 8,000 people there." And I said, there were probably 500 or 600 people in the line afterwards that were, most of them saying something nice to me. And I said, my head's just spinning. And he said, "Man, that is something." He said, 8,000 people. I said, "Yeah." And he said, 500 or 600 in that line. I said, "Yeah." He said, "So 7,400 people didn't give a damn what you said." And so we need help like that from folks, right? I called him one time. I said, "Man, I just gave a terrible talk." And he went, "Well, Steve, you're starting from a false premise." He says, "Because that implies there's a night you think you gave a good talk." And he said, "It's not up to you to give a good talk or a bad talk." He says, "The only thing for you to do is go do what you were invited to do to the best of your ability on that given day or night." And That's what y'all are getting this weekend. It might not be much, but it's all I got. Next weekend, I got some really good stuff for next weekend I'm holding. But, you know that this is where we're going in and to face and be rid of those things in ourselves which are blocking us. And we agnostics, it says the things that will block me will obstruct this new relationship. Deep down within every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. So I've adopted for me the idea that that's where God is, that this divine spark, this internal power in some way that I'm trying to connect to. But it says it will be obscured by pomp, by worship of other things, and by calamity. And as Peter said, pomp, I believe, is that pride and ego, the reemergence of that. And worship of other things is anything that I rise above that power. And it usually happens, I usually don't know that it's happened, but you know, in a given day, all of a sudden, a business deal becomes the most important thing in that day. When I didn't know it, but boom, or a concern about my daughter, or some circumstance is so frightening, or I have given it such importance or unhealthy dependence, it has now moved God out of the way. And I don't even know it happened sometimes until I'm looking back at it through review. And calamity, by the way, there can be a financial calamity, there can be a health, there can be loss of a loved one, or I can go home tomorrow and the shows that I set to record on my DVR might not have recorded. And that can be a calamity, because I will tell you what I've determined a calamity is. A calamity is anything I've decided can't be happening to me. You know, your calamities hardly ever, I'm empathetic, but I do not toss and turn over your problems at night. You know, I'm all in, but they're not the ones that drive me. My self-centered fears are the fears that will end up running my life. So just like Peter said, so I'm encouraged to list these resentments, whether it's people, whether it's institutions, whether it's principles, because I'm going to face and be rid of. I'm going to look in the eye of these things that have been blocking me. So that they've been blocking me from the sunlight of the Spirit. My spirit is darkened by these things. And so it's almost like your hose pipe when you're choking it off, right? And it's just dribbling some water. And I want to open that up so it flows freely. I want to open up the channel so that divine spark can flow freely. And so I list these things. I finally got a list of resentments. I told you I couldn't come up with resentments, and so we expanded the language a little bit. My sponsor said, because again, I was mostly disappointed. I didn't view it as angry or resentful. But he said, what about anybody who's disappointed you, who frustrates you, who's let you down, who irritates you? And that language actually broadened the list a little bit, right? We will talk further in the 8th step. It says, what do we mean by harms? So when I'm trying to look at the harms that I've done them, it says, what do we mean by harms? It says, what about physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional harms? Well, today, when I'm able to take that information and bring it back into my resentment inventory, if you will, when I'm trying to figure out, how did they harm me? Have they harmed me physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually? And so I get this list, and that's really pretty self-indulgent, right? I mean, who gets more excited than when your sponsor says, you know what, get that pen and paper out, let's list those SOBs that have done you wrong. He calls it a grudge list. It says I'm burned up. I get to come at this let's get them. Write it down, Steve. And then put up, what'd they do to you, brother? No, don't hold back. What did those sons of bitches do to you? And we're right. That's the self. And what did it cause? Oh, you got in your pocketbook, man? He's messing with your self-esteem. Oh, personal relationships are being affected. I cannot believe those guys are doing that to you. And this says, well, we got this, so what am I going to do now? I got it. That was kind of fun, but I've been doing this all my life. I hadn't always been putting it on paper, but I've been taking inventory. I've been talking about the people that I was upset with and what they did to me all my life. So what's our course? It's all right, this is where the game changes. Because we could no more be rid of these resentments than we could alcohol. Apparently, I have no more power over this resentment once I have it than I do the ability to stop drinking. And it says, so this is where I invite a power I don't have in to help me do something I can't do. It says, here's our course. It says, referring to our list again, right? From a different angle. Let's look at things from a completely different angle. What I would say is, as we sit here right now, you guys can see things from where you're sitting that I can't see. And I can see things that you can't see. And it doesn't make us wrong about what we see. It, again, it's just not the whole picture. So it says, let's look at this from an entirely different angle. That perhaps they, like ourselves, are spiritually sick. I certainly didn't get to Alcoholics Anonymous without doing some damage. Yet I tend to hold other people to a higher standard than I hold myself. It says they, like ourselves, are sick too. That's what connects us. That's not what separates us. That's what gives me the empathy and perhaps the beginning of a different way to look at this. It says we ask God. So now we're in the prayer business. Right now I'm petitioning God for power I don't have to do something I can't do. We ask God to help me show pity, patience, and tolerance that I would gladly grant a sick friend. So ask God, how can I be helpful to this person? How counterintuitive is that? We ask God to protect me so I don't argue or retaliate. And then it says, at least God will help me show a kindly and tolerant view towards each and every one. At a minimum, that exercise should leave me a little more kind and a little more tolerant than I showed up. The beginning, so the resentment, in my experience, is beginning to shrink during that process. And it's only as I'm getting a little freer from the actual resentment that now I can look at the nature of my wrongs without being blinded by these feelings of hatred and resentment and disappointment and frustration or whatever it is. Now I can look at me, and it says refer to our list again. See, they keep sending me back to the list, but they keep changing how I view it. So now we're referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs of others. We resolutely look for our own mistake. So again, to me, that says columns 2 and 3 are gone. Now I have this person on my list, and the question for me is, I'm looking for any mistakes I've made in this relationship, or perhaps where I have done some of these things in other relationships, if not to this person. But I begin to see that I'm capable of the very crimes I'm charging this person of sometimes, or a different version of it. And so that's where I ask myself, where have I been resentful, dishonest? Where have I been selfish? Who have I hurt? And then I can see me without being blinded by that, and begin to get a more accurate appraisal of where self showed up in these relationships. This is very much like I watch these CSI procedurals, NCIS, used to be Las Vegas CSI or whatever it was, pretty soon they'll have Painted Porch CIS. And what happens in every one of these, they all start the same. In the first 10 minutes, there's a dead body. And they call the CSI team in. And the CSI team are going to take this dead body back to the lab. And if you watch NCIS, Ducky's going to perform an autopsy. He has solved more crimes than anyone. And they go in because in this episode, a car has gone off of a cliff, fallen hundreds of feet down, crashed at the bottom of this ravine, burst into flames. And inside that car is a badly mangled and burnt body. So when they get there, to all external appearances, one would deduce that either the fire or the crash killed this guy. He's burned up and he's mangled. But that's not sufficient for the CSI team. They go in, right? They do an autopsy. They cut and go in, and they discover that he had a massive heart attack, which caused the crash, which caused the fall, which caused the fire. Now, I would tell you for my case that column 2 is the accident, but is it the actual cause of death? Is it the actual cause of the resentment? I got to go in and see where self showed up. Because I will just do a drive-by and the external circumstances support my story. There's another story. It's a Sufi story, but with my accent, I've never felt right telling a Sufi story, so it's just a couple Tennessee rednecks, right? And there's old guy, old boy can't find the keys to his pickup truck, you know. He's at his house, he's going out and he's looking in the front yard for the keys to his pickup truck. And finally a couple of buddies of his drive by, and they get out and they're going to help him find the keys. He explains his dilemma, and they get down there crawling around painstakingly looking for the keys to his pickup truck. Before long, you got 8 or 10 guys just covering that front yard looking for the keys to that pickup truck, till finally one of them asked him and said, "Man, where were you when you lost the keys?" And he said, "I was in the house." And they said, "Well, what are we doing out here?" He said, "Well, the light's so much better out here." And see, I keep looking out here because the light's so much better, and I will explain my circumstances to you so effectively you will help me look. But the keys are inside. None of my problems are external problems. They look like it. They feel like it. It sounds Pollyanna to say, because it requires a level of surrender and acceptance that I'm usually not willing or able to muster for this external problem not to be a problem. And that third step prayer, when I say, "God, relieve me of my difficulties," I don't think I'm asking God to change my circumstances. I'm just like, I just don't want it to be so difficult. Let me do the same thing and it not feel so difficult. So help me with that peace of mind. Help me find that comfort. Help me find that faith. Help me find that hope that sustains me in the midst of this problem, rather than requiring you to resolve this circumstance in a way that's satisfying to me. And so I get to navigate that territory and hopefully come out of that, and hopefully there's been some forgiveness in that. Hopefully there becomes some empathy because of shared experience with that person. Hopefully I begin to offer a little grace to people and recognize how that could happen. It doesn't mean I'm going to become buddies with everybody, right? What's happened to me with a lot of people that I end up having a strong resentment against, and if I determine that rather than continue to be angry, I become disinterested. Right? With alcohol, I want to get to a position of neutrality. And I would like at a minimum to get to a place of neutrality with other people in my life. Rather than actively hate you, what if I just became disinterested and moved on to where my real interest is? But I want to keep going back, right? I'd call my sponsor Frank, and my first sponsor, and Frank was kind of a gruff guy, and Frank, I always say he had very little patience and worse phone skills. And so when I would call Frank, as we sometimes do, and when we explain our problem to our sponsors, we do it in agonizing detail. Right? I mean, because I want him to understand. And I am digging in, and Frank would just stop. He'd say, whoa, Steve. He says, "Let's just assume you're right. Now what?" No, Frank, let's go back over this, you know. I want to relitigate the case. And see, forgiveness, I suffer, and not consciously, this is unconscious. This is me being asleep and not seeing things as they really are. I want to keep litigating the case. I do not want the trial to ever be over. I don't want to move on. If I forgive you, in my mind, it meant you win. I'm one of the most forgiving people you will ever meet. If you apologize to me and are contrite enough in front of a large enough crowd. But what if my forgiveness doesn't require anything of you? Because my forgiveness doesn't mean that I'm giving you absolution. It just means that I'm letting go of that hard heart, that I'm moving on. And as Peter says, I'm no longer taking that guy home with me, right? I'm no longer waking up thinking about it. So that's a huge freedom there. The fear inventory, the examination, self-examination of fear. I didn't do a fear inventory until I was till I was 7 years sober. And I didn't know I hadn't done one. And I don't blame that on anybody. But I was at a weekend much like this, except the two guys were much more impressive than me and Peter. And it was Don P. and Gary B. And they got to the inventory part of the weekend, and I had not done what they were talking about. And I had not understood it, but it gave me a different way to go. And so that afternoon on Sunday of March the 7th, 1997, I did my first fear inventory. And I've got it. I show it to guys all the time. I also show them some other fear inventories. The last big one I did was 2019 in February as well. Apparently February is when my fears come to a boil. But because I want them to know that I still have them and I still do it, right? And but that fear inventory was really revelatory to me. It changed the arc of my recovery, because while resentment may be the number one offender and may destroy more alcoholics than anything, I would tell you that is a percentage. But my personal experience for me is that fear, self-centered fear, was the most debilitating thing. What I did and did not do because of fear. At 6 months sober is the first, I'm sitting in a meeting on a Saturday morning, and the meeting was going to be over at 12:30. And at the end of the meeting, somebody said, and I'm loving AA. I'm sober, and I love meetings. I'm coming to meetings, and I'm going home, but I'm not really engaged yet in the fellowship, and I didn't even really quite get that, right? And at the end of the meeting, somebody said something I'm sure they had said many times before. But somebody said, after the Lord's Prayer, somebody said, hey, a bunch of us are going to lunch. Who wants to go? You're all welcome. And I thought, man, these people are talking to each other between meetings, apparently. Apparently there are relationships that are growing out of this. And I desperately wanted to go. And I got in my car and headed over to the identified restaurant, and about halfway there I turned off and went home. And the next week I went and I turned off and I went home. And I was afraid. My fear was that I was unwilling to risk being embarrassed or having a self-conscious moment. I was afraid that I was going to walk in that restaurant and there would be 6 people at a table for 6. And I didn't know if they meant me. I didn't know if I would ask them to scoot over. I didn't know if they would. So rather than risk that, I'll just go home. And I said what I needed was a couple guys to come over to me after the meeting and go, Steve, we've been talking. We really want you to go to lunch with us. And we're just arguing over who gets to sit with you. And then I would go, right? I would go because you would have removed those barriers, but the barriers are this self-centered fear. And that's what my friend Lyle down in Georgia says. I'd rather be dead than embarrassed. And I believe, frankly, that has taken a lot of us down. And it happens in that embarrassment of in a 4th step or in a 5th step of beginning to share these things about myself. The way I drank is not what I thought was different about me. It is how I felt that I thought was different about me. And if you'd have said, Steve, how do you feel? I don't know how I feel, but I know it's different than how I think you feel. And that's that disconnection and where that sense of loneliness comes from. And this 4th step and this 5th step, what I'll tell you my experience has been, because I have done half measures. As Peter said, I have written a 4th step to my sponsor. You know what I mean? Or I better rephrase that, because he'll ask me this question about that, and I don't want to go there. And I'll be honest enough in that 4th step that he'll be impressed at how honest I am, but he won't know what I've held back. And the 12 and 12 says, right, we thought a proper display of honesty would get us by. But see, nobody's trying to figure out this stuff about me. The inventory's for me, and I tell the guys I sponsored, just write it. You don't have to decide till well after you've written it whether you want to share it with me. That'll be your call. I'm not charged. I got no authority. Sponsorship has no authority with it. So why wouldn't you just put it all down, and later you can decide whether you want to do the fifth step. And whether you want to do it with me, I hope you will. But that fear was such a driving force in my life. As I did that first fear inventory, about halfway through it, I wrote down in real time that I had noticed that self-pity was the dominant defect showing up. And I will tell you, I'll give you something that's worth trying. Next time you write some inventory, read it back to yourself in a whiny voice. And it's not to, look, this is real stuff, and I'm not to minimize it and make fun of. I mean, I do that for me, but when I do that, and I read it in a whiny voice, sometimes I go, oh man, how much self-pity is in this thing, right? And that's just for me. I don't put that on anybody else. But the fear, we were going through, we went bankrupt in 1999. Well, Connie would say that I went bankrupt and took her with me. We lost our home, and mostly my bad choices. We lost our home. They came and picked up our cars. You know, you surrender your cars in that deal. And she and my daughter and I had to stand there. They came to put these cars on a flatbed truck, and they were driving them off. And I called my sponsor, Frank. I said, Frank, man, they took our cars. And he went, no, Steve, they took their cars. He said, just to put a fine point on it, they took the cars you weren't paying for. And but this was 2 years before I did this fear inventory, and these fears about going broke were in there. And I said I didn't want my wife and daughter to suffer for my irresponsibility and bad choices. I didn't want my daughter to have to get out of the school she was going to and go to another school that I deemed less desirable. I didn't want us to have to move out of the home we were in and move to a different home. And all of that was true. I cared about them, and I didn't want them to have to do that. But the next level of fear in that was I didn't want it to be my fault. I didn't want to be the guy that was the reason for that. And the third level of fear, and the one that was most dominating to me, was I didn't want you to look at me like the guy that let that happen to my wife and my daughter. This self-centered fear, what I think you think, is again at the core of my fear inventory. Howard Poland's, that some of you folks know Howard used to tell a story, and he even wrote a book called My Life on a Frozen Lake. But the story that was that informed the title to the longer book was just he would talk about how so many of us are prone to living our life like we're living on a frozen lake. He says, and like we're taking a walk across that lake, and with every step we're afraid that ice is going to crack and fall and we're going to go through and drown. And what an angst-driven walk that is on that ice. And Howard told the story beautifully and better than I will, but I called Howard, and we were at conferences a lot together, and I said, Howard, I've improved on your story. And he did not think so, by the way, but Howard's passed away now, so I'll tell my damn story. And I said, Howard, in my story, there are two guys walking across a frozen lake. One guy afraid with every step that the ice is going to crack, he's going to fall through and drown. And one guy absolutely certain and faithful that the ice is going to hold him. And they take off on their walk across the frozen lake, and about halfway across, sure enough, the ice breaks and they both drown. I said, but the guy who thought the ice was going to hold him had a much nicer walk up until then. And see, I don't know what's going to happen, but I want to enjoy the walk, right? And that doesn't mean don't look both ways when you cross the street, not that kind of let go and let God, you know, but just to act on that next right thing, the commitment I made in the third step. Here's what I'll tell you. The other thing I believe is that list of fears in my third step is where I just broke the contract I made in the third step. In the third step, I said, I offer myself to thee, right? I said, build with me and do with me as you will. And the fear inventory is accept these things. You got it all but this stuff. Not my money, not my family. And so I'm breaking this covenant. I don't know it. It's only, it was only like 5 pages before, if we're doing it in the book, where I said, I take all of me. I'm in. Do with me as you will. And then I said, well, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job. Hey, God, that's a bad plan. I'm walking around with a list of things that I'm afraid to turn over, and that's the human nature part of it. We're never going to get past that at some level, but I will tell you, with fear, I'm not nearly as afraid, nearly as often, for nearly as long, at near the intensity that I used to be. But perhaps the biggest freedom from fear for me is that I don't have to pretend I'm not afraid when I am. And that means, and there's a difference. I got my sponsor, and I have confidants that I call regularly and go, man, I got to do this thing today, and I'm wrapped around the axle. I'm scared. I'm nervous. I'm anxious. But that fear doesn't inform the actions I take. What you've encouraged me to do is act like a guy would act if he were not afraid. What would you do if you weren't afraid? And that helps inform my decision making. Doesn't mean I don't. The book says all men of faith have courage. So courage is still required to navigate through the faith. I want to talk quickly about the sex conduct inventory and try to do it appropriately. And it is sometimes a difficult conversation to have. Nothing turns a room like this into a junior high school gathering than the discussion of sex. And I'm usually the one doing it. But apparently sex is, when we started this 4-step into 12 and 12, it says that we have these God-given instincts for sex, society, and security. So apparently sex made the top 3. And in my fear inventory, it made the top 3 things. For self-examination, that's an area I'm encouraged to examine. And but it gives me some information right away if I'm willing to believe it. It says, first of all, it says right in here, it's wonderful. We all have sex problems. They didn't even say we all had them. There's a few places in the book where they say this used to be a problem. Bill's writing the book. He says we all have sex problems. I stand here today fairly confident that in this room at one time or another, most everybody has a sex problem. Sometimes it just looks a little different than it used to. Sometimes it shows up a little different than it used to, because the sex problem isn't often about the act of sex. It is about my relationship to this area of my life and the influence it's having on me. And as Peter said, is it blocking me off from God? Is it blocking me off from you? Is it making me less useful? Is it causing harm? When AA says we're not the arbiter of anybody's sex life, I believe that. So AA as an institution does not care how often I have sex, who I have it with, what gender they are, how many of us there are, where we have it. None of that. What you asked me to do in Alcoholics Anonymous, though, is to lay over that conduct a series of questions that to answer honestly. Is it selfish? Who might get hurt? What could you have done instead? Are you arousing jealousy, bitterness, or suspicion? And can I lay it over my conduct, and see where I land with it? Now, I got a 10-minute story to tell in 8, but so listen fast. But at 8 years sober, and I had straightened up, and there had been infidelities in my marriage before I got sober, and when we get to amends, I'll talk about that some. But at 8 years sober, during that first 8 years, I'd not been challenged in this area too much. And my brother and I took some guys out to dinner one night, a business dinner. They'd come in from out of town. And it became apparent toward the end of the evening that they would like to go to a gentleman's club. And nothing has been more misnamed than the Gentlemen's Club, because I went and there were no gentlemen. But we're sitting there, this wasn't even on my radar, right? And my brother, we were paying the bill, and my brother said, "Look, Steve, I know this isn't your thing. You can go home. I'll take these guys." I mean, it wasn't his thing either, but he said, "I'll take them." And I went, "I'll go." And so we go, right? I come home, I sneak in my own house for the first time in 8 years. They came back a couple of months later, and we went again. Then I started going just to see if they were there, you know. I started going on my own, and pretty soon I'm just, I'm just a couple of weeks from being on the Jerry Springer show. And I hadn't, of course, talked to anybody about this. And I went to my sponsor, Frank, and I said, "Frank, this is what I'm doing, and I'm feeling guilty about it." And I'm so grateful for the way Frank approached this. And he said, "Well, Steve-O," he said, "either quit going or quit feeling guilty. I don't care which." And he said, "But since you're feeling guilty, let's do an inventory." And he said, "The inventory may allow you to go without the guilt, or the inventory may reveal to you what doesn't work for you." He wasn't trying to influence where I landed. He didn't identify the target and take me to it. The inventory takes me to it. And he said, so why don't you submit it to these questions? And so I did. I said, "Well, is this dishonest?" And it was dishonest. Certainly my wife and daughter didn't know where I was going. But it wasn't so dishonest that I probably couldn't, that I didn't think I couldn't handle it, you know. And said, is it selfish? Well, of course it's selfish, right? I mean, the selfish aspects of that are pretty easy to ascertain. Also, I'm spending money. You know, our money was tight, and I'm spending money, and we did not have a line item budget for strippers in our budget at home. And then I got to the line that said, "Are you arousing jealousy, bitterness, or suspicion?" And the answer was no. The answer was absolutely not. Because in that 8 years, I had won back the entire trust of my wife and my daughter. They weren't worried about where I was. They probably assumed I was with you, probably assumed I'm helping somebody when I'm out a little late. There weren't a lot of questions. This was no. And that's what I discovered wasn't going to work for me. And when I was able to look at that in inventory, take that into 6 and 7, ask God's help, that has not been an issue since. But had I not been willing to do the inventory, I would have characterized the problem in what I viewed the problem in a totally different way. So that's been a huge thing for me. Now I got 4 minutes to tell an 8-minute story. Today, what does today look like? Well, first of all, I will tell you that this, and Peter alluded to it, guys come up, when somebody doesn't share something in a 5th step with me, almost invariably, when they do come back, it is to say, "I didn't tell you something and it's of a sexual nature." Because that is so personal and private, and sometimes we attach so much shame to that we don't treat it like any other problem. They told me right at the beginning here, let's talk about, Steve, you're cheating on your taxes, you're cheating on your wife. We're going to treat those two problems the same in terms of the principles that are involved. So can we talk freely about it and get past, being bound up by it? And but today I kid, and Connie just rolls her eyes when I talk about half the stuff I talk about, but I got her permission. But a sex problem today might look like, now, I will tell you, Sunday afternoons has evolved into the conjugal visit at the Lee household, right? And because there's a little less spontaneity at, I need to schedule stuff these days. And but we sort of fell into that, and it's an important part of our life, that our physical relationship continues to be an important part of our overall relationship. And but let's say it's Sunday afternoon, and nothing's happened yet, right? I mean, I'm sitting down in the den watching TV, but I'm kind of waiting for the signal, right? And then the day goes a little longer, and nothing's, there's no signal. Now, I don't say anything because I'm still a kid at heart, and that's still embarrassing sometimes. So I don't say anything. I just start stewing a little. Then all of a sudden I hear the shower on, so that means she's taking a shower. Then she comes out in that robe, and you know the robe. It's not the seduction robe. It's the store's closed robe. I don't say anything. I just sit in my chair and pout. Then my daughter calls, maybe. And I answer, but I'm short with her because I'm irritated and frustrated. Then a sponsee calls. Well, I'm not talking to him. I got to sit here. I got some being pissed off to be. I'm not through being angry about this. So it is interfering with my usefulness to you and others. And it's interfering with my relationship with God. And it doesn't seem like it, and it is as simple and almost as absurd and comical, but life is comical sometimes. But that's what that will look like for me today. And to get past, what's funny is that hardly happens anymore because we've got to a point where we can have a conversation rather than just let the appointment get canceled, And everybody has different areas. The pornography has become such a prevalent thing and such an accessible thing. And I'm sitting here as where I sit here today, I'm not taking a position on pornography. No position at all. I ask myself the same questions. Is it selfish? Is it hurting anybody? What could I do instead? Is it arousing jealousy, bitterness, or suspicion? And do no harm is rule number one for me on all of this stuff. And see, because what I will do, I've come through here looking for the exact nature of my wrongs. We'll talk more when we come back for 6 and 7, is I'm guilty sometimes of confusing the behavior for the defect. The behavior is an outgrowth of the defect. The root of my problem is the defect. Why? Is there perhaps an unhealthy dependence on something? Or why something that should be, that is God-given and perfectly okay, why do I struggle with that? Sometimes people's sex problem is their relationship with sex on the other side of too much. It's not being able to find a comfort level for themselves. And so I'm uninterested on which side of the fence anybody's on. What we're trying to do through the inventories again is identify my relationship to this. Do no harm. Make sure that it's not stopping me from being of maximum use to you and my fellows. And as Bill does in almost all his writings, he says that this imperious urge, if this problem is pervasive, we throw ourselves all the more into working with others, which is, we find over here, always the solution to just about any area of our life that we're struggling with. We'll take a break and come back this afternoon. Thank you.